All right, so what I want to talk about in this video is what I would call the power of I+1. It's an incredibly powerful learning concept. I+1 is simply the idea that I is where you are comfortable. It's performing a skill or a task at a level that is very easy for you. When you're brushing your teeth, you're at I, right? You can do it, and it's so simple that it's not challenging. You don't even have to think about it, right? That's sort of the idea of being in the I zone. Well, in language teaching, we want to operate mostly in the I+1 zone. Being in the I zone is really, really good for our warm-up activities to kind of get our students ready for what we're going to do. The I zone is easy comprehensible input, or comprehensible input that is at or below what students are able to easily comprehend, right? So that's a great idea it's a great zone to be in for the warm-up. But in order for students to improve, for learning to take place, we have to get in that +1. And that's really just as a conceptual idea. It just means pushing yourself a little bit, but not so much that your effective filter skyrockets and all of a sudden it's too much and you can't handle it. So there's a video on the effective filter too. These kind of go together, but I've separated them because I want to really talk about I+1. It is something that you're going to have to practice. You have to be very aware of where your students are, both individually and as a whole class, in order to stay in that zone. And it's not there's fluctuations, right? Some days you may have 70% of the class in I+1, and 30% of the class is in I. They're just advanced, and you sort of have to play with that spectrum of learning and see, well, right now I've got some students and this is they've got it. This is easy for them. But 70%, 7 out of 10 students really need to practice here. They need more time. I+1 for 70% might be I+4 for 30%, and you've got to have to kind of deal with that. Bringing in some differentiated instructional techniques to kind of keep everybody on task and working towards improvement. I think of I+1 as basically the rule for steady improvement. And this applies to almost any type of activity that we do, whether it's, I'll give you an example. If you're a runner, for example, and a 2-mile run for you is easy, you do a 2-mile run every day, that's I. I+1 might be a 2.5-mile run, right? That extra half mile might be where you're trying to improve your endurance a little bit. You wouldn't run 2 miles every day and then all of a sudden go out and try to run 12 or 20. You would sort of build up gradually, and that's the idea of steady improvement over time. The idea of small incremental improvements over time yields big improvements, and that's the power of I+1. We're going to talk about it throughout the course, especially as we work on lesson plans, so that we are conscious of are we trying to push our students just a little bit so that they improve, but not so much that they get discouraged, they shut down. It's too hard. I'll end with one language example. So let's imagine that it is a novice, high, intermediate, low level class. A class where you're doing a lot of descriptions, trying to learn a lot of basic vocabulary. You're staying in the present tense. I+1 would be possibly showing a more advanced grammatical concept with your comprehensible input and your grammatical competence plan. But you wouldn't, for example, jump into the subjunctive. You probably wouldn't even jump as far as going into a lot of past tense things, right? You'd be exceeding what they're able to do conceptually at that point with the language. But I+1 just really means steady improvement, and it's, again, one of the most critical components of language teaching.